All right, so in this worksheet, you're given the graph of a function. Notice that this is a closed circle, this is an open circle, so keep that in mind. Here, this is an arrow, and this is an open circle. So you've learned about what it means to have a closed circle and an open circle on a graph of a function. So we do oh, and by the way, if there's no function value, I wanted you to say does not exist. Write out does not exist. And then you also had to indicate the domain and range in interval notation. All right, so let's go to number one. So number one, you want to find out from the graph of this function f of x, when x, remember f of negative 1 means what is the y value when x is negative 1. So I go to the graph and I find out where x is negative 1. So on the graph, so you see on the x-axis, this is where negative 1 is. So let's put, let's correspond that to the point of the graph. So this is the point of the graph where x is negative 1. My y value is 2. So then we have the answer. What is the y value when x is negative 1? My y value is 2. F of negative 6. So f of negative 6, what is the y value when x is negative 6? So when I find negative 6 on the x-axis, the point that corresponds to that is this closed circle. Now remember, the closed circle indicates that that point is on the graph. It's part of the x value is going to be part of the domain. So that's going to be negative 6, and then my y value is a positive 2. And so when x is negative 6, my y value is 2. So remember, closed circle is part of the graph. Open circle is not. It's not, so the x value would not be part of the domain. Over here, you want to find f of 5. So what is the y value when x is 5? So when I locate 5, that's this right here. When I look, there's no point on the graph. So when I look at the graph here, the graph only goes from x equal negative 6 to x equal 3. There is no point of the graph where x is 5. All right, so that means that f of negative 5, you're going to say does not exist. All right, so that x coordinate is not even in the domain. There's no point of the graph where x equals negative 5. F of 3, what is the y value when x is 3? So notice that's that point here. You see that? That's that point here. That's an open circle. That means x equal 3 is not part of the domain. So you're going to say here does not exist as well. Okay, don't put negative 3. So if you say f of 3 equals negative 3, then that means that 3 is in the domain of this function, but that's an open circle. So you cannot include it. That's not on the graph. So there's an infinite set of points on the graph. All these are on the graph except this right here and anything else. Okay? All right, now let's talk about the domain. So the domain is a set of x coordinates. So when you're finding the domain, you want to go from left to right along the x-axis. So when I go from left to right along the x-axis, I start touching the graph at this point here. See, there are no arrows here. No arrows at all. It's just an open, closed circle, open circle. So you start touching the graph when x is negative 6, and that's a closed circle, so that means negative 6 is in the domain. So then you're going to say bracket because it is in the domain because of that closed circle, negative 6, comma, all the way, and you're going to keep going all the way until you get to this point, and you can't go any further because there's no graph. So all the way to this point here, which has x coordinate 3. But that's an open circle, so 3 is not in the domain, so you're going to put a parentheses there. So that's your domain. Domain is a set of x coordinates. So when you look at every point here, every point in that graph, the x values are going to be any number, any real number between negative 6 and 3, including negative 6, but not including 3. Your range is the set of y coordinates. So you're going to go from bottom up along the x-axis. Because remember, when writing domain and range, you want to go from smallest to largest always, smallest to largest. So when I look at this, I start touching the graph when I get to this open circle. And remember, open circle is not part of the graph. So my y value, remember the domain is a set of y coordinates. So if we look at this point here, that has y value -3. -3 is not in the range because this point is an open circle. So you're going to say parentheses -3, comma, and then you're going to keep going up until you reach the highest part of the graph, which is right here. Okay, right here. And so let's label that point. So that's that point right here. Okay, and so that is, if I label that point, that is -3, 3. So when I look at that point, the highest y value, the largest y value on this graph is 3. All right, and so you're going to say parentheses -3 to 3 with a bracket. All right, so that was number 1. You can do the same thing with number 2, except notice you do have an arrow here, and this is a open circle. So let's look at f of 3. So what is the y value when x is 3? So when x is 3, here's where x is 3. The point corresponding to that is right here. So that's going to be point x coordinate 3, y coordinate 2. So when x is 3, my y value is 2. So 2 goes here. Now here you're going to add these two together. So let's find f of 1 first. So f of 1 is going to be this point here. And so notice when x is 1, my y value is -1. So I put -1 right here. Plus, and then we find f of -1. F of -1 is going to be this point right here. So when x is -1, my y value is -3. So that's going to go here. And then -1 plus -3 is a -4. F of -3, so when I look at f of -3, that's going to be this point here. When x is -3, I get this point of the graph. So that point of the graph has x coordinate -3. My y coordinate is -1. So f of -3 is -1. F of 5, all right, so remember our previous discussion. So here's where x is 5. Here's the point corresponding to that. That's an open circle. So that means that x equal 5 is not in the domain. So that point, that open circle, that point that you see here is not part of this graph. So then you're going to say does not exist. All right, now let's talk about domain and range. So domain, remember, is a set of x coordinates. So you're going to go from left to right, from smallest to largest. Notice, though, that this is an arrow, so it just keeps on going like this. So remember, what that means is that this keeps on going. So any point from -infinity, because it keeps on going. So you get all these x coordinates here are going to be on this graph. Remember, when you're dealing with -infinity, infinity for domain and range, there's always going to be parentheses that you're going to use with it. So from -infinity all the way. So when I keep on going, there are no other arrows, but it stops here at this open circle. So this x coordinate though is 5. But since 5 is not in the domain, because that open circle, you're going to put parentheses. So 5 parentheses. So that's your domain. Now let's go about the range. So remember, the range is a set of y coordinates. So that's where you go from the lower part of the y-axis to the upper part. Notice, so this is when I go from bottom up, this is where this is where I start touching the graph at this low point right here, this relative min right here. And this y value is -3. Now, that's a closed circle. The only open circle I saw on the graph was right here, right? So you're going to use a bracket for this one. So you're going to say bracket -3, comma, and then remember there was an arrow, right? So don't stop there and say that the highest y value is 4, because you know that arrow implies it keeps on going. All right, so notice all these y values right here. So it goes all the way to positive infinity. And whenever you use infinity, -infinity, you always put parentheses with it. And so that is the key to this worksheet.